Ocelon had silenced his tide caller 3 days ago, and he had not once regretted it, which was why he did not know that the Convergence had called an emergency session, and why he did not know that 17 households, including his own, were expected to be seated in the hollow spire before the tide turned, and why he had no idea that somewhere above the storm line a single gray ship had been sitting motionless in high orbit for the better part of a week, waiting. He also did not know that his tide caller, wedged under a shelf of black coral where he'd left it to keep it dry, had been vibrating for 6 hours straight. None of that mattered right now. Right now there was a bloodfin. The bloodfins ran the mid-columns of the Vethra Trench in loose shoals, fast and paper-thin, built for nothing but flight. And Ocelon had been tracking this particular one for the better part of an hour, matching its panic turns a half-beat before it made them. His outer mantle had gone the mottled gray-green of deep water, every chromatophore locked down tight, and his 8 lower limbs trailed behind him in a single disciplined line, cutting no wake at all. The trench walls here were close enough to touch on both sides, ribbed with old shell growth that glowed faint blue where his passing disturbed it, and the pressure sat on his hide like a second skin, familiar as breathing. His instructor had told him once that a reckoning hunt should feel like nothing. No fear, no thrill, just work. Ocelon had never once managed nothing. Right now his hearts were going so hard he could feel them in his beak. The bloodfin broke left around an outcrop of dead coral, and Ocelon let it. He'd been letting it choose its turns all hunt, because every turn a fleeing thing takes teaches you the shape of the turn after that, and he already knew, the way you know a held breath is about to end, that the next choice would take it straight into a cul-de-sac of collapsed reef. A dead end it wouldn't discover was a dead end until it was already inside. It went left, then it went low. Then it went nowhere at all, because the reef closed around it like a fist, and Ocelon was already there, already coiled through the gap it hadn't noticed, already closing the last of the distance in a single boneless surge that cost him nothing because he'd spent his effort 3 turns ago instead of this one. The bloodfin didn't even have time to flare its warning color. Ocelon held it a moment after it stopped moving. The old ritual stillness his grandmother had taught him. You do not celebrate the kill, you acknowledge it. And for 1 clean second, the trench was simply quiet and cold, and his, and nothing in the entire ocean, was more urgent than the fact that he had, at last on his own, without an instructor drifting 3 lengths behind him, with the disappointed set to her mantle, executed a full reckoning pattern hunt from set to strike. He did not know that 400 kilometers above him, Elder Speaker Vess was standing in front of the full Convergence explaining, for the second time, what it would mean for their species to surrender. Ocelon surfaced into the kelp light with the bloodfin trailing from 2 of his limbs, already composing, with some embarrassment, the story he would tell about how easy it had actually been when he noticed that the shelf market above the trench mouth, usually a chaos of vendors and juveniles and old males arguing about currents, was completely empty. Not closed, empty. The stalls were still set up. Nobody had cleared them. It looked like everyone had simply stopped mid-motion and left. He surfaced fully, letting his mantle flush back to its normal blue-violet, and that was when he remembered the tide caller under the coral shelf a half-kilometer back, and felt for no reason he could name yet a small cold seed of dread plant itself somewhere under his beak. By the time he retrieved it, it had stopped vibrating. It simply sat there, glowing a steady, insistent amber, displaying a number that made no sense to him at first, because he had genuinely never seen it that high. 61 unread. He opened the oldest one first, which was, in retrospect, the wrong choice, because it meant he had to sit there in the empty market with a dead bloodfin still hanging off his arm, and listen to Elder Speaker Vessa's recorded voice calmly explain that a vessel of unknown origin had entered the outer system 4 days ago, that it had done nothing but sit there, that it had eventually transmitted a message in crude but functional Ithku, and that the message, translated as precisely as their linguists could manage, read, "We come bringing the Great Stillness." Aslan did not know what the Great Stillness was, in the sense that no one his age used the phrase seriously anymore. It was a myth word, something out of the old, deep songs, the thing that had ended 3 previous cycles of the world before this one, the silence that comes after everything stops moving. He knew what it meant the way you know what a word for ending means without ever having personally ended. He opened the 2nd message, then the 9th. Then, skipping ahead with a rising unsteadiness in all 8 of his limbs, the 58th, which was time-stamped less than an hour ago, and simply said, "The convergence has reached consensus. We surrender." He dropped the bloodfin. He did not notice he had dropped it. The swim back to the hollow spire was the fastest he had ever moved in his life, faster than any reckoning pattern, faster than anything his instructors had ever clocked him at, and the whole way there his mind kept doing the thing it always did under pressure, which was to seize on the smallest, most selfish fragment of the disaster and worry at it like a loose tooth. The Great Stillness. Surrender. Fine. Terrible. Incomprehensible. But also, and he hated himself a little for the thought even as he had it, the reckoning trials were scheduled to open in 11 days, and the joining after them in 20. And if the convergence surrendered a species to anyone, silence or otherwise, did that mean everything simply stopped? Did the trials still happen? Did anything happen ever again? He had failed his first attempt at the reckoning 2 cycles ago, badly, publicly. He had spent every day since training for this one specifically, so he would not have to be the only one of his Earth cohort still uninitiated when the joining came around, and now some ship that had said nothing and done nothing except sit there for 4 days was apparently enough to end it all before he even got the chance. He was furious at himself for caring about that right now. He kept caring about it anyway, the whole way home. He arrived at the hollow spire covered in bloodfin ichor he hadn't had time to shed, mantle still patched with the dull gray of exertion instead of the deep formal blue every other adult in the chamber was wearing, and the moment he pushed through the outer membrane into the great council bowl, every head in the water turned toward him at once, and the low continuous murmur of hundreds of Ithkol all talking at once simply stopped, the way a struck bell stops when you grip it. Nobody said anything cruel. Nobody had to. He could read it in the particular way their mantles all flickered the same shade of disapproving gray in near unison, the way old Farinel's beak clacked once, sharp, the universal Ithkol sound for unbelievable. He looked, he understood with a wave of hot embarrassment, exactly like what he was, a juvenile who had spent the most important morning of his species history hunting fish. Elder Speaker Vess drifted toward him through the parting crowd, her mantle a deep unreadable violet-black, old scarring, showing pale, along one flank from a life spent doing things far more dangerous than surrendering to an empty message. Ocelon, she said, and her voice carried the particular flatness of someone extremely tired. You missed the explanation. I will not repeat the whole of it. But since you are here, and since you clearly have something you would like to say, her eye clusters flicked, not unkindly, to the ichor still drying along his limb. Say it quickly. He should have apologized. He should have simply asked to be caught up and taken his place in silence like everyone else his age was clearly doing. Instead he said, "What did the ship actually do?" A ripple of clacking beaks went around the bowl, half outraged, half disbelieving. Vess's eye clusters narrowed, but she answered. It arrived. It positioned itself at the edge of our system. It has not moved since. 4 days ago, it broadcast a message you have presumably now read. And in 4 days it has not entered the system further. It has not scanned our defenses. It has not deployed anything. He was thinking out loud now, the fear from the swim curdling into something more useful, something closer to the total focused stillness he chased in every hunt. Elder Speaker, if a hunter wanted to end something, would they announce it from 4 days away, and then simply wait? You're comparing the greatest threat this convergence has ever documented, Vess said slowly, to a bloodfin. I'm comparing it to every hunt I have ever seen fail, Ocelon said, and something in his own voice surprised him, steadier than he felt. Things that mean to end you close the distance. They don't sit at the edge of the reef broadcasting their intentions, and then wait a week for a reply. That isn't a killing pattern. He groped for the word, found it. That's a greeting pattern. A wary one, but a greeting. The bowl had gone very quiet. You want us to believe, Vess said, that a message reading we come bringing the Great Stillness is a greeting. I want us to ask them what they meant before we agree to stop existing over it, Ocelon said. That's all. Just ask. If they truly mean the stillness, we've lost nothing by asking first. If they don't, he spread 2 limbs. An old ithcal gesture for the reef is wider than you think. Then we've nearly surrendered our whole species over 3 badly translated words, days before the reckoning even opens. He heard himself say it and knew, immediately and with total certainty, that everyone in that chamber now believed the last part was the actual reason he'd said any of it. He wasn't entirely sure they were wrong. Vess studied him for a long moment, her mantle cycling slowly through 3 or 4 unreadable colors, old currents of thought moving behind ancient eyes. You may have a point, she said finally, and the bowl erupted into astonished clacking. I will send the clarification myself. In the meantime, her gaze dropped pointedly to the ichor drying on his limb. Go and get clean, child. You represent this convergence whether you're asked to or not. 6 days passed. Ocelon spent them the way he spent every anxious stretch of time, which was training obsessively for the reckoning, while trying not to think about the fact that there might not be a reckoning left to attempt. On the 7th day, word came back through the spire that the humans, that was their name for themselves apparently, spat awkwardly through translation systems that were clearly still learning, had responded to the clarification request with something between an apology and utter bafflement. The ithcal word for peace, it turned out, and the ithcal word for the great stillness that ends all cycles, shared a root so old that most modern speakers no longer thought of them as related at all, the way a word for rest might once, in some deep original sense, have also meant rest forever. The human translation engine, Built on second-hand fragments of Ithcol broadcast traffic, it had never had a native speaker to check its work against, had reached for the older, deeper meaning, and rendered it with perfect grammatical confidence and catastrophic literal accuracy. The humans had meant to say, "We come bringing peace." They had, instead, told an entire species that they had arrived to end it. Ocelon was, as far as anyone could determine, the only person in 100 systems who had actually laughed out loud when he heard it. A short, disbelieving bark that got him several very sharp looks from the elders standing nearest him, because underneath the horror of it there was something almost unbearably stupid about the whole thing. A mistake so small and so enormous at once that it had nearly ended civilization on principle. What followed was, to Ocelon, considerably less funny. Because he had been the one to catch it, the convergence decided, with the particular circular logic elders reserve for decisions they don't want to fully own, that he and his household were uniquely suited to receive the human delegation directly, rather than routing first contact through the senior diplomatic corps the way any sensible species would. It was presented to him as an honor. He noticed distinctly that nobody senior to him seemed to want it. "You found the flaw," Vess told him in a tone that did not invite argument. "You will help us find out what else we don't understand about them." He suspected with the particular clarity of someone who has just watched every elder in the room avoid his eye at once, that what she actually meant was, "You started this, so you can stand at the front of it." They gathered in the sunken amphitheater 11 days later, the same day, Ocelon noted with a private, furious sense of cosmic timing that the reckoning trials had been due to open. The amphitheater was a natural bowl of pale coral near the surface, one of the few places in Ithcol territory where light reached the water in clean, unbroken shafts instead of the perpetual blue dimness of the deep reefs, and hundreds of Ithcol had gathered along its terraced rim, mantles flickering nervously through the whole visible spectrum, watching a patch of open water above the bowl where, for the first time, something not native to their ocean was about to arrive. The ship came down slowly, breaking the surface without violence, sliding beneath the water in a smooth, controlled descent that Ocelon found himself grudgingly impressed by. Nothing about the movement suggested aggression. Everything about it suggested caution, the careful, watchful movement of something that did not want to be misunderstood twice. It settled at the amphitheater floor, and a hatch along its flank folded open, and out of it came 4 humans in sealed suits, moving with the exaggerated slowness of people trying very hard not to look threatening and utterly failing to look anything but strange. Narrow, upright, two-limbed, faces pressed close behind clear visors, watching the assembled Ithcol with an expression Ocelon didn't have a word for yet, but would later learn was called nervous. One stepped forward. A device at the collar of the suit translated in careful, over-enunciated Ithcol. "Greetings. We apologize for the message before. It was a mistake in the words. We meant no harm." We meant the human paused, visibly searching for the safest possible phrasing. We meant rest. Calm. Not the other thing. Ocelon, standing at the front rank because no one else had volunteered to, replied before Vess could stop him. "You meant peace." The human's whole posture changed, some tension leaving the shoulders. "Yes, peace. Exactly." Then say that instead of guessing at old poetry, Ocelon said, not unkindly, and heard behind him several elders make small strangled sounds of disapproval at his tone. The human, oddly, laughed a short surprised bark of a sound, not unlike the one Aslan himself had made a week earlier. "Fair," the human said. "I'm Commander Reyes. We'd like to understand your people better, if that's permitted. Your world is unlike anything we've charted. The way you've built around the trenches, instead of against them, it's remarkable." "What is there to be permitted?" Aslan asked, honestly puzzled. "You are already here." Another visible ripple of alarm went through the human delegation, quickly smoothed over. "We don't want to overstep," Reyes said carefully, "after the misunderstanding. We're trying very hard not to make assumptions about your customs." Aslan considered this. It was, he had to admit, a more thoughtful answer than he'd expected from a species whose opening communication had nearly triggered a mass surrender. "Ask then," he said. "We would rather answer a direct question than guess at a careful one. Guessing is what caused this in the first place." Reese's mouth did something complicated behind the visor that Aslan would later come to recognize as a smile, trying not to be a smile. Noted, then directly. "What are your intentions going forward? Do you wish to join a wider community of species, or would you prefer we simply leave you be?" The humans exchanged a glance among themselves, some silent communication passing between them, and Aslan understood with a sudden lurch that this question, meant for the whole convergence, was about to be answered by whoever spoke first, and everyone senior to him in this amphitheater seemed to be waiting, with visible relief, for that person to not be them. "We would like to learn about you as well," he said, because it was true, and because someone had to say something. "But there is something happening among my people very soon. Something important. It is not a war, and it is not a treaty, and I don't expect you to understand it yet. I would ask that whatever you plan to study, whatever time you plan to spend here, you give us a season first, uninterrupted." It was not strictly his authority to ask. He felt Vess go very still behind him. Reyes tilted his head, visor catching the light. "May I ask what it is?" Aslan hesitated. Then, with the particular reckless honesty that had gotten him into this exact situation, in the first place, he leaned forward and told him, quietly, just for the commander, not for the recording devices Aslan correctly suspected were running somewhere on that ship. Whatever he said, it made Reyes's eyebrows climb somewhere near his hairline. "Understood," the commander said, straightening, addressing the whole amphitheater now, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been suppressed amusement. "We won't interfere with your season. We'll return in a few months, once it's concluded, if that's agreeable. In the meantime, we'll keep our distance." The humans withdrew not long after, the ship rising back through the shafted light, and vanishing into open sky with the same unhurried care it had arrived with, and the entire amphitheater stood in stunned silence long after it was gone, hundreds of mantles cycling slowly through disbelief, relief, and something that hadn't fully processed itself yet. Vess found him at the edge of the bowl, staring up at the empty patch of sky where the ship had been. "Aslan," she said very carefully, the way one speaks to something that might still be dangerous. "What, precisely, did you say to that human?" "I told him about the joining," Aslan said. Vess's mantle went a shade of pale gray he had genuinely never seen on her before. "You negotiated the terms of first contact with an interstellar power," she said slowly, "in order to protect your mating season." "It's an important season," Aslan said. "Aslan, I've been waiting 2 cycles." Elder Speaker Vess who had just watched a juvenile single-handedly avert the surrender of an entire civilization, and then spent his one moment of galactic leverage negotiating a delay so he could attend a dating festival, closed all 4 of her eye clusters at once, and did not open them again for a long moment. The Great Stillness, she finally said, to no one in particular, would honestly have been simpler.